I'm quite curious, about all these writers from all over the world who were like interested in spiritism, occultist, and all of that. I'm quite curious though. Did they really believe in it, or was there a fascination? Or
Where did the fascination start?
I try to remember the director with which I did the Polish play we did just before COVID, Giorgio. He was really interested about writing a story about werewolves and vampires, and he basically told me about mostly werewolves, about a true story when people were thinking they were wolves or becoming wolves, and there was real dark cases about devoration of people by people thinking they were wolves.
Isn't that lycanthropy?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was.
Lycanthropy, from the Greek word lykos, wolf, and anthropos, man, is a mental disorder in which the sufferer believes that they are a wolf.
And this thing about werewolves connects with Jekyll and Hyde in a kind of dual personality sort of thing.
Because you have the beastly side, isn't it? Facing.
It's this switching between the two, between the human and the inhuman, the subhuman. And also I suppose we connect it with the full moonlight. And he gives us that scene of the full moon and this subhuman creature, Hyde, attacking the elderly gentleman who asks him what time it is, something along those lines.
And also the control over the wolves, over the beasts of the night.
And I was thinking the werewolves and Jekyll and Hyde, it is in a sense, it almost could be a derivation of the werewolf legend in some ways. And there's this theory that he was exploring the dual personality, because he was very interested in that, and he'd already explored it in an earlier play.
I was just reading, like, on the page of Stevenson about Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I was awakened by cries of horror from Louis. Thinking he had a nightmare, I awakened him, and he said angrily, "Why did you wake me? I was dreaming a fine boogie tale." I was awakened him at the first transformation scene.
Yeah. It's at the critical point she woke him up because he was screaming so much.
Louis wrote Jekyll and Hyde with great rapidity on the lines of his dream. In the small hours of one morning, I was wakened by cries of horror from him. I, thinking he had a nightmare, waked him. He said angrily, "Why did you wake me? I was dreaming a fine bogey tale." I had waked him at the first transformation scene. He had had in his mind an idea of a double life story, but it was not the same as the dream. Louis Stevenson.
And then I think he describes that and he goes into it in more detail. There's this interview he gave to the New York Herald.
Yes.
Go in here a little bit. And he makes the point that even when fast asleep, he says, "I know that it is I who am inventing. And when I cry out, it is with gratification to know that the story is so good."
Even when I fall asleep, I know that it is I who is inventing. And when I cry out, it is with gratification to know that the story is so good. For instance, all I dreamed about Dr. Jekyll was that one man being pressed into a cabinet when he swallowed a drug and changed into another being. I woke and said at once that I had found the missing link for which I had been looking so long, and before I again went to sleep, almost every detail of the story as it stands was clear to me. Of course, writing it was another thing.
I love that. I love the way you just, like, the gap, like, okay, that was great, but now I have to write it.
And it's quite interesting. He actually wrote a whole essay, a chapter on dreams. And
really?
Yeah. Well, we'll probably read an excerpt from that. It is quite interesting because he talks about the little, what is he, does he call them little brownies in his head? And they're the ones who give him the ideas, is it? Who help him to write the story.
Wow.
But then he sort of slightly backtracks on that in another part and says, you know, that it comes, he doesn't know where it comes from. He gets these images and he has to write them down.
Oh, wow.
I can but give an instance or so of what part is done sleeping and what part awake, and leave the reader to share what laurels there are at his own nod between myself and my collaborators. And to do this, I will first take a book that a number of persons have been polite enough to read, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I had long been trying to write a story on this subject, to find a body, a vehicle, for that strong sense of man's double being, which must at times come in upon and overwhelm the mind of every thinking creature. For 2 days I went about racking my brains for plot of any sort, and on the second night I dreamt the scene at the window, and a scene afterwards split in two, in which Hyde, pursued for some crime, took the powder and underwent the change in the presence of his pursuers. All the rest was made awake and consciously, although I think I can trace in much of it the manner of my brownies. The meaning of the tale is therefore mine, and had long pre-existed in my garden of Adonis, and tried one body after another in vain. Indeed, I do most of the morality, worse luck. And my brownies have not a rudiment of what we call a conscience. Mine, too, is the setting, mine the characters. All that was given me was the matter of 3 scenes, and the central idea of a voluntary change becoming involuntary. Will it be thought ungenerous, after I have been so liberally ladling out praise to my unseen collaborators, if I here toss them over, bound hand and foot, into the arena of the critics? For the business of the powders, which so many have censured, is, I am relieved to say, not mine at all, but the brownies. From Robert Louis Stevenson, a chapter on dreams.
And I think the psychology was starting to evolve. I mean, there was a question, there was a starting, isn't it, with the asylum and all of that, about this interest about the mind, about broken minds and all. Because this is basically in the 19th, even the 18th century, when people were starting really about thinking about the mind. And because the asylum, well, we wouldn't agree about the methods today, but there was a fascination still for the change of personality, you know. I try to remember, have you seen the movie? It's from 2010, and it's with Anthony Hopkins and Benicio del Toro. And it's the werewolf, basically, the remake of the 1930s film. And it's really, and there is a parallel about madness and werewolves. And there is scenes when the character is actually brought to the asylum. They put water on him because they think he has the doubling personality. The Wolfman, yeah, the movie is The Wolfman.
Wolfman. Oh, okay. Well, that maybe I'm not sure. With Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah, Anthony Hopkins. There is Anthony Sher actually in this scene, who plays a doctor, a German doctor. Here we are. I will kill you all. That's the scene. I will kill you all. When you have time, you will watch it. But basically, yeah, when you talked about several personality, I was like, oh, I need to watch this movie again, because, and as we said about vampirism or even the werewolf, or also the scientific based and the beliefs, like the origin of all that.
Well, Darwin had just come out with the evolution theory 15 years before, wasn't it? Was it the descent of man?
Yes, indeed.
So the way he made the point, he concluded that humankind had descended from a hairy-tailed quadruped. Yes, so that these stages of evolution had been preceded in a direct line by some amphibian-like creature, and this again from some fish-like animal. So you've got all of this rather nightmarish, very gothic biological lineage.
In a way, this is in a way the truth, because we come back from bacteria, and from these bacteria came different species.
probably he would have been familiar with Darwin.
Darwin's The Origin of Species was published in 1859. This was followed by his Descent of Man in 1871. Of course, Stevenson would have been familiar with Darwinism. In fact, Stevenson was influenced by both Darwin and Wordsworth. In his 1887 essay, Books Which Have Influenced Me, Stevenson says, "Wordsworth should perhaps come next. Everyone has been influenced by Wordsworth, and it is hard to tell precisely how." According to T.B. Olson in his paper, Robert Louis Stevenson's Evolutionary Wordsworth, Stevenson grappled with Wordsworth's and Darwin's conflicting influences, and his writing bears signs of the struggle. While Darwinism shaped Stevenson's reception of Wordsworth, prompting him to reject some of the poet's ideas and to retain others, Wordsworth's poetry informed his response to evolutionary theory. From Robert Louis Stevenson's Evolutionary Wordsworth by Trenton B. Olson, from Victorian Literature and Culture, Volume 44, 2016.
And then the other thing that he might have based this idea on, he'd written a play a few years before. Robert Louis Stevenson. And he wrote it, and there's two possible characters, real-life characters, he may have based it on. And you know that, yes, I've just been reminded now, looking over these things, that Stevenson often referred to himself as myself and the other fellow. And so he'd use this, he would use this to describe two states of consciousness that he experienced. Whether it's when he was, suffering from a fever, because he was often ill for, much of his life. He was not, he's not strong physically.
Oh.
Yeah, so that might be a connection. But before he wrote Jekyll and Hyde, he co-wrote this stage play about this person who would be very respectable by daytime, and then by nighttime would go out breaking into wealthy people's houses, stealing their jewellery. Yeah.
Oh, was there a local man in Edinburgh, very famous, who was hanged, but was known to be one of the most wealthy and well-known men, and turns out to be a criminal?
That's it, but I can't remember the name. Can you remember the name?
I try to remember because I saw it on a documentary of Robert Louis Stevenson.
The name of the play was Deacon Brodie, or The Double Life, which Stevenson co-wrote with W.E. Henley and was published in 1880. The play was based on the real life of William Brodie, who was an 18th century Edinburgh cabinet maker and locksmith by day and a burglar by night. The idea of duality evidently stayed with Stevenson.
Another thing, when I don't know if it's all of them, but you often have this when it's something as fresh as that. I mean, look, Robert Louis Stevenson, he wrote out Jekyll and Hyde pretty much as soon as he'd had the nightmare. He started dashing it down, and then his wife Fanny, she noticed, she made a point about, well, where's the model that you were expressing, you were going to have in here? There's lacking that detail you were going to put in. And he went and burnt the first draft and wrote it out. Yes, and wrote it out again from scratch. She went in and she was absolutely horrified the fact that he'd burnt it. He just pointed at the ashes and the hearth and said, "There's the old story. Now I'm writing it again. You're quite right. I have to rewrite it." So she was very nervous of saying anything.
Okay, I didn't see any. Don't burn it. Don't burn it.
Yeah. So he was but he was still pretty fast. I think it took him less than 2 weeks to write that.
Wow, because it's quite an interesting novel. I mean, the atmosphere in it, and it's a big book. I mean, it's not something like. Probably there was rewriting and all that, but yeah, it's quite a big and very, how can I say this? A book with a huge, you could feel what he wanted to create in the mind of the reader.
It's very vivid, isn't it? All the way through, it's fresh. It feels as though he has just just experienced it all.
Because the London I read in his books it sounds more like a nightmarish vision of London rather than a real London.
He's still in that Gothic canon, isn't he? With
It's always at night, basically. It's really rare. I've realized in some of the Gothics, when it's actually day, it looks like dawn. And I mean, when I was reading Camilla, I could only imagine, I can have images in my head like a movie, and I could only imagine when it's during the day, it's basically the sun is always in an in-between thing, about to go down and not necessarily going up.
Or else it's casting a strange light and the shadows threatening.
It's really weird, but I was always thinking, like these.
Yeah, crepuscular, twilight, dusk.
Yeah, indeed.
Dawn. Yeah, the between light. Yeah, it's probably quite intentional. And of course you get that special light, when things are changing between, morning and early morning, night turning to early morning, and then early evening turning to dusk, turning to twilight, turning to nighttime. So those are moments of the light is very clearly changing. So it's very suggestive that other things are changing as well.
Yeah. It's like this. And it lacks this, the old tradition about, when you arrive at the end of the day, it's like the portal between the living and the dead is just opening up. Especially in Halloween, basically it will be more for at the Halloween time, on the solstice, when you feel that souls of the deceased will come to visit the living.
Yes.